Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Teresa Harriet, and I am the coordinator of the Poetry and Storytelling Series for the Mosier Arts Festival. My committee member, Hannah McCoy, is right here, and my other committee member, Ron, is over there. Honorary committee member. You don't have a mic, do you?
No, you're right here. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. No, that's all right.
We can hear you when you speak like that.
Okay.
Yeah, see, I have a big mouth anyway, so I'm
Yes,
good.
sir.
Yeah, you're good. I'm sorry. Do I need to repeat, or you heard? Can you hear me now? I'm Teresa Hilliard, coordinator of the Poetry and Storytelling Series for the Mosier Arts Festival, and my committee member, Hannah McCoy, and honorary committee member, Ron Hilliard, are here with me this evening. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank you all for coming out to the Mosier Poetry and Storytelling. You are in for a treat. Now, Mr. Damon, or Professor Damon L. Fordham, he is an author, he is a tour guide, and he's also an adjunct professor at the Citadel in Charleston. This evening, he will be performing Tales of a People from Africa to South Carolina. He will present a combination of tales, folklore, and historical stories he gathered from his forays to West Africa, along with the research he has done for local publications and speaking engagements for the past 30 years, including his most recent books. He has 3 books that are in the back for sale. He conducts a walking tour in Charleston called The Lost Stories of Black Charleston. His presentation is suitable for all age, so even the baby can enjoy. I present to you Professor Damon L. Fordham.
Thank you very much. All right. Now, as Ms. Harriet mentioned, I spent 2 summers in West Africa, along Senegal, Gambia, as well as Togo. And while I was there, I uncovered a lot of things that most Americans don't know, but I think will be kind of beneficial. And that is the phenomenon over there that they have called the griots. I had a great time with them. The griots are a 1,000+ year historical tradition in West Africa. Before the Islamic religion came to that region and brought the written word around 1076 AD, they had writing in Ethiopia, in Egypt, and some of the East African countries, but not so much the West. So they depended on these local storytellers called the griots, who would pass down information about the kings, queens, families, and kingdoms for generations and generations, as well as life lesson stories. And I'm about to do a few for you right now. And first is the story of the great king of the Mali Empire from around 1200 AD, king known as Sundiata. And they will tell about how Sundiata was born to a king named Megan Konfada. And Megan Konfada, like many kings over there, he had more than one wife. But one of his wives came as a sort of deity. And she was known as the Buffalo Woman. Why do they call her the Buffalo Woman? Because she was ugly. So ugly she could scare the bark off a tree. And so another problem that he had was he had no heirs. So one day, one of his servants came in. Your Majesty. Yes, what can I do for you? Your Majesty, one of your wives is with child. Really? At last? Which one? Is it Khadijah? Is it Amina? Is it Fatima? You mean the Buffalo Woman? Lord have mercy. So they gave birth to, so one day the king is sitting there and all of a sudden he gets a message. Your Majesty, yes? I have tidings for you. Really? What are they? But Your Majesty, your wife has finally had a child. Oh, really? Is it a boy or a girl? Well, you see, Your Majesty, it's a boy, but really, I'd like to go see him. Well, Your Majesty, before you do that, you might want to wait a minute and wait, what is this stalling? Is there something wrong? Well, you see, Your Majesty, it's something like this. Out of my way! I demand to see my wife and child. Don't say I didn't warn you. So he burst in there, burst in the compound. Where is my child? Your Majesty, you might want to brace yourself for this. King looked down. Oh, my goodness. Boy, the child was home. Mouth all twisted up, body all twisted up and everything. How am I going to run a kingdom with a kid like this? Lord have mercy. So soon enough, King Megan died of natural causes. There was an evil king who lived nearby by the name of Sumanguru of the Soso kingdom in the Mali Empire. He and his raiders came into the kingdom. Out of my way! We shall get all of the rice, the gold, the women. Who is the current king of this empire? Well, you see, your evilness, he's right over. Good, where is he, so I can slaughter him and take over this kingdom? Well, it's not going to be that easy. He's right over. Out of my way! And he came in. Where is the king of this Mali Empire? And a voice went, Here I am, Your Majesty. Who are you, the court jester? I'm the king, and you know, you're not a good guy. I want you out of my kingdom right now. You're really a bad person. What is this, the Shrimp King? Okay, look, you know what? I'm not even going to waste my sword on you. I'm going to keep you around for the court just so we can have laughs. Hey, look here, you see this little weak Shrimp King they got here? This kingdom is ours. The gold, the money, the women. It's on! One of these days I'm going to fix you. So, as time went on, King Sumanguru drove the kingdom into the depths of despair. When all of a sudden these three brilliant men came by, where is the current king? Here I am, over. Oh my goodness, they're the king? We must take you on a journey of manhood training so that you will be fit to rule. Oh, really? That's a good idea. Well, first we got to work on that voice for one thing. Come on, let's go. 20 years later, Sumanguru was counting his ill-gotten gain. 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. Yes, who is it? Your Majesty, I have tidings for you. Oh, what is it? You see, you remember that king that you mocked so hideously some 20 years ago? The king that mocked hideously. You know, the one with the weak voice? Oh, the Shrimp King, him. Yeah, he's good for laughs, isn't he? Whatever happened to him? He wants to challenge you for the rule of the kingdom and the kingdom over in the battlefield of Karina. He wants to challenge me for the kingdom? All right, look. Okay, get one of my swordsmen out here. We'll go out there, cut this guy's head off, and then we'll be back in time for lunch, all right? All right, come on, let's go. So he went into the valley of Karina with one of his swordsmen. All right, Shrimp King, come on out. I got to cut your head off so I can do some more robbing and stealing here. And, oh, my goodness. He looked up from the valley and into the hills. Thousands of Africans were being led by this huge 7-foot man with rippling muscles and a sword on his side, surrounded by thousands and thousands of male warriors. Sumanguru, it is I. Who are you? I am the one who you mocked all those many years ago. Sumanguru, for all your ill-gotten gain and the destruction of my kingdom, prepare to meet thy doom. And he took his spear and shoot. And Sumanguru went, ah! So much for that. And for the next 25 years, Sumanguru would rule the kingdom with great intelligence and prosperity. A little word about this King Sundiata. You see, the word Sundiata translates into the English language as the hungering lion. And so therefore, if he is the king and he was the hungering lion, guess where Disney got that story from? And I know. And that's where Disney got the story of the Lion King. From Sundiata, the Lion King of West Africa.
Wow.
Now, if you remember, I told you that they used a whole lot of stories in order to pass down wisdom through the generations. There's a Dr. Cisse down at the University of Gambia in Banjul, West Africa, who does a great job of preserving this because he feels that these life lessons are still needed for the current generation. And one of the stories that they preserved is, some of you who are really into folklore have probably heard of Anansi the spider. Anansi was this wise spider who was often a trickster, who would often, they would use his stories for life lessons. One was about Anansi and the jar of wisdom. Anansi wanted to be a wise man. So one day he found out that there was a jar of wisdom that if he had it, he would get all the wisdom of the kingdom. So he looked around and searched and asked around for it. And then all of a sudden he was able to find this jar of wisdom. So he said, good, it's all mine. I'm going to be the wisest spider in the village. So he took the jar in one of his tentacles. He used the other tentacles to crawl up to the tree and keep the jar of wisdom. But all of a sudden, it got kind of slippery and went, whoa, whoa! And the jar went crash down on the ground. And lo and behold, all the other animals of the kingdom came by and took all the wisdom that was out of the jar. And so Anansi went, and the wise old spider happened to come back. Hey, what's the matter, Anansi? You look kind of upset about something. What's bothering you, boy? Oh, wise man, I just dropped this jar of wisdom that I had all to myself, but now I dropped it, and so all these other animals have this wisdom, and I don't. Well, Sonny, it seems to me that that's not a bad thing. Why is that? You see, if you had all that wisdom and you died, what would have happened to all that wisdom? That's why it's better for many people to have wisdom instead of just one. And those are the kind of life lessons they used to use. And another one I found in Gambia was the national folktale of Sona Mariana. Sona Mariana, so the people of Gambia say today, was this beautiful young girl, but her father was wicked and very abusive. And so one day she went to her mother and said, "Mother, I am tired. Father is so abusive." "Well, I know, child, but what can you do?" "I know what I can do. I could run away and escape and drown myself in a nearby river." "Oh, child, you don't want to do that." "But, Mother, I cannot go on living like this. Can you please help me find a cover so I can run away?" "Well, I don't like what your father is doing, but still, well, I tell you what, I'll stall him when you wake up so that you can go away." "Thank you, Mother." So one morning, as the father was making the father's breakfast, she kept diverting him, so Sona Mariana ran away. And she ran and ran and ran and ran and ran until she saw an elephant. And so she said, "Mr. Elephant, do me a favor." "Oh, what is that?" Please use your tusk and beat me into the ground and stomp on me." "Now, why would you want me to do something like that?" "Oh, my father, he treats me so terrible. I just don't want to deal with this anymore." "You don't, huh? I'll tell you what I'll do." "What is that?" "I'll take you to the king. He might be able to help you." "Oh, okay." So the elephant took his trunk and, he made a little purr for her. So she sat on the trunk and the elephant went on the trunk, carried her, and she saw the king. And the king said, "Oh, hello there, elephant." "Whoa, who is that?" This is Sona Mariana." "Oh, put her down. Come here, Sona Mariana." "Yeah, you kind of nice looking. Yeah, so what's the problem?" "Oh, my father, he is very abusive toward me. I just don't want to deal with things anymore." "Ah, you're very well spoken. You're kind of nice looking and all of that. I can solve your problem. Summon your father to me." "But I don't want to go back to him." must tell you, something bothered me. So she went back to the village, and the mother was happy to see her and start with her. And the father came by. Where have you been? Well, Dad, I got somebody who wants to see you. And who is that? The king. You told the king about me? Yes, so what you gonna do now? Well, I have no choice but to go before the king. So the father came by. Salam alaikum, your majesty. I am not worthy. Wa alaikum salam, and you certainly aren't. So, your majesty, so I take it your majesty wishes to banish me away and so forth. Yeah, I do, but except for one thing though. I'm going to give your wife a dowry. A dowry for what? This nice, fine young lady that you have over here, she's intelligent, she's nice looking. I can use a nice queen, so therefore she will forever be my queen, and you are forever banished out of here. And Sonamar's like, really? That's right. All of this is yours. And so thus Sonamariana went on to be a queen. And the people in Gambia use that story to illustrate that even if you are in a very rough situation, it can be possible to get out of it one day if you continue to stick with what you're trying to do. And you can always find people that can help you out when things go wrong. So from here, we move on to one of the great questions that people have about West Africa. What happened? How did it fall into that condition that it did? Well, basically, there was a fellow by the name of Rahman al-Sadi. When he saw what was happening in this community about 400 years ago, and he was a Muslim scholar, he was an African Muslim who wrote in Arabic, and he consulted the wise elders of his day. And here's the story. You see, back around the 1500s, they had a great wise king in what was called the Songhai Empire of West Africa. That's from modern-day Senegal all the way to what is now the upper part of the Congo, about the size of the modern-day United States. And their greatest ruler was a man named Askia Muhammad. He would occasionally travel over to, and his great-grand-uncle, incidentally, was the great Mansa Musa, who traveled to Egypt and had all the gold and all of that. But this Askia Muhammad had these great schools in places like Timbuktu and Genève, as well as a truckload of gold, as well as expanding his kingdom to great lengths. But you see, ladies and gentlemen, as the great scientist Sir Isaac Newton has said on the law of gravity, what goes up must come down. So, while he was a brilliant king, he had these lazy, worthless, and trifling sons who were jealous of the daddy's wealth and wanted it now. So in 1528, the old king went blind and lost his sight. So one of the trifling sons, Musa, overthrew the throne and exiled the poor old daddy over to a nearby island where he died of diabetes. And while this was happening, a few years prior to this, in 1502, Columbus was on his third voyage to the Caribbean, and he brought with him a Spanish priest named Father Bartolomé de Casas. And Father Bartolomé was horrified at the way Columbus was treating the Native Americans. So Father Bartolomé said, we got to do something to alleviate the suffering of these people. His solution, go to Africa and use the blacks instead. So as all this is going on, King Musa and his even less intelligent brother Ashik was basically, they were running the kingdom in the ground, fighting against each other. Things were just going downhill. And so finally, up in Morocco, nearby Arabic kingdom Morocco, they had a sultan named Al-Mansur. And he said, the people down there in the Songhai kingdom have something that I don't have, gold. But I have something that they don't have, guns. Put together the dots. And so that led to the transcontinental slave trade of West Africa. Over in the west coast of Senegal, they had an island called Gorée Island. where I visited the last couple of summers. And that's where they had one of the several doors of no return, where they marched people out of the dungeons across this door to the plank that led to the slave ships. And that was the foundation of the slave trade. So, Rahman al-Sadi said, "My kingdom is falling apart. The wisdom of the elders will soon be lost." So he wrote down all of these things in a book in Arabic called the Tariq al-Fashtash. Okay? But however, because of all this chaos, it was lost for many years. In 1896, a Frenchman named Octave Boudard came down to that region, and he asked about it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's over here." And he found a copy in Arabic and translated into French. And very recently, about 20 years ago, a scholar up at the University of Chicago, Dr. John Oliver Hundrick, he managed to translate it into English. And he also found a whole lot of documents there. And so, not too long after Hundrick died, an American scholar went over there and is now in the work of translating a lot of this stuff. You might have heard of him. The man who I'm proud to say is a friend and mentor of mine, Dr. Henry Louis Gates. And that's how a lot of this history was preserved. Now, one more before I leave this story about Africa, is that in Senegal, we went to Senegal to the Black Civilizations Museum, Dakar, capital of Senegal. And the tour guide there, the young lady who is a political science major at the University of Dakar, she told us this amazing story about Queen Mbodj, who back during the 1800s, the Senegal region was threatened by both the Moors of Morocco and the French colonizers. So while the Queen was away, a group of Moors and Frenchmen terrorized this community. And the women, rather than submit themselves into slavery, they ran into a hut and set the hut on fire, preferring rather to die at their own hands than to that of colonizers. So Queen Mbodj, when she came back and heard about this, she led a battle against the Moors and the French to keep her people free until she died in 1860. And so we're riveted this story while the young guy is telling us this, and her name was Kariba. And as she told this story, she went by this portrait of this queen, and she said, but when that queen died, she had several sons and daughters. And she smiled and added, they are my ancestors. That was my 6th great-grandmother. And the pride that she showed in telling that story shows the importance of knowing about ancestry. So let's take all of this on a local level, okay? Now, I grew up in Mount Pleasant, but I was born in Spartanburg. And I was put up for adoption as an infant, and I found my family when I was in my 30s. And one of the people who provided a strong link to my past was my Aunt Barbara, who died about 2019. And whenever I would visit her, I would listen to her tell stories, and then I'd go in my car and write down the stories in a notebook. And that's going to be put in a future book. And one of the stories deals with this. She said that back around 1941, there was a store up in Spartanburg called the Community Chest. And one of my grand aunts took my biological mother over to there to do some shopping one day. So anyway, she said that my mother had to go to the bathroom. And so she went to the clerk and said, excuse me, but where's the bathroom so my niece could use it? And so the clerk said, well, we don't have bathrooms for colored in here. I see. And so she went to a nearby corner, and she saw a mop and a bucket, took the mop out of the bucket, put it in the middle of the floor. And so the clerk said, girl, what are you doing? And said, my grandaunt looked at her and smiled and said, well, since she can't use your bathroom, I figured I'd put the bucket right here, and so she can use it right over there. Goes to show you how they use their skills for resistance back then. But here in Charleston, there's a whole lot of rich history that a lot of people don't know. And I'm going to start off by talking about this aspect of it. Here they are. Some of you might be familiar with this. Now, thank you. Most of y'all know that as Michael rowed the boat ashore, right? What a lot of people don't know about that is this. In 1867, musicologists came down here to write a book called Slave Songs of the United States. And they heard local black people singing that, and they put it in the book, and that's how it first became famous. Now, in 1956, we had a great civil rights leader here, who some of you remember. You might have heard some, and for those of you who haven't, her story is quite interesting. Miss Septima Poinsett Clark. Well, Miss Clark, in 1956, she was fired from teaching at what's now Sanders Clyde Elementary because of her civil rights activities. Right. So she went to Monteagle, Tennessee, where she taught illiterate black adults how to read and write and register to vote and take charge of their lives. In about 1959, a group of white college kids from the Greenwich Village in New York and University of Berkeley in California, they came down to assist in this. And they were all locked up together, but of course she's in a separate cell from them. So while she's alone in the separate cell, she began to calm her nerves by singing Michael Row the Boat Ashore. And the white kids never heard anything like this before. So when they were all released, the white kids went back to Greenwich Village and the University of Berkeley in California and the coffee houses and all of that, and they took that song with them. So this is where you get that generation of folk singers, all of Pete Seeger, Peter, Paul, and Mary, Mamas and the Papas, and Joni Mitchell, and Joan Baez, and Bob Dylan. If y'all could just imagine Bob Dylan getting up there and going, I love the booty sure, hallelujah, and so on and so forth. That's how that song became world famous. By the way, I have to add this. Miss Clark, in 1981, sued for the unjust lost years of teaching, and the state of South Carolina paid up before she died in 1987. Now, what does that have to do with anything? That song, along with the sweetgrass baskets, the foodways and the folkways of the black people in this region, the dialect and the culture and so forth of the black people in this region, these things form the Gullah culture, sometimes known as Egypt. The Gullah culture gets its name from the Goya tribe of Sierra Leone and Liberia, who were brought here because of their skills at growing rice. And from about Georgetown, South Carolina, down to Brunswick, Georgia, you had the Sea Islands, where they had the rice plantations. So they needed people who knew how to grow rice. And to this day in West Africa, I've seen this with my own eyes, they still have people who make the rice baskets, and rice is a major part of their diet. So they brought those people to those islands, and the islands were isolated. There were very few white people beyond the white plantation owners. So because of that isolation, from Georgetown to Brunswick, they kept more of their African speech, folkways, and culture than any other black people brought to these United States. And this is how we get the Gullah culture. My grandmother, Jamie Fordham, was born around 1900 in Owendaw, South Carolina. And my grandmother never had the opportunity to go to school and read and write because she had to work in the fields. So she spoke Gullah to the day she died in 1976 when I was 12 years old. Now, in 1968, when I was 4 years old, she would call me in the house by going, Damon, y'all turn too trifling. Y'all better come on and y'all like box y'all now. And things like that. So she and my grandfather saved their money so that my dad could go to South Carolina State University in Orangeburg. And Dad was the first of 3 generations of teachers in our family. I'm the second, and my nephew's the third. And in those days, if you were an educated black family in Charleston, your parents did not want you speaking Gullah because back then they looked down on it as being country, backward, and low class and ignorant. But, as you could tell, I always had a love of mimicry. So every now and then I would deliberately make Dad furious by going, Daddy, I ain't hungry, I just want some okra soup. Stop that! I didn't send you to school to talk like that. How wrong, Daddy, I just want to eat. Stop it! Put my grandmother, stop it, I say. So in 1932, Dr. Lorenzo Dow Turner of Fisk University, Nashville, Tennessee, came to teach at South Carolina State, and he was shocked to hear the students from this area say things like, man, Dr. Turner, what up in here, man? Up the window. Excuse me? Man, Dr. Turner, hot up and ya up the window? Why, what type of speech is this? I find this fascinating. This, I must study. So he went throughout coastal South Carolina and Georgia studying Gullah. And later on, he met a lady by the name of Amelia Dawg in Harris Neck, Georgia, right outside of Brunswick. And in talking to her, she began to sing a song that went something like, "Awaka yilele yile 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 waka yile." Madam, what is that you are singing? Oh, my great-great-grandma used to sing that when I was a little gal. Let me see if I understand you correctly. Your great-great-grandmother used to sing that when you were a little girl. Madam, I must ask you this. Did your great-grandmother come directly off the boat from Africa? Yeah, how you didn't know that? Why, Eureka! That's the funeral song of the Mende tribe of Sierra Leone. Why, this Gullah is not the ignorant, backward country junk that people think it is. It's the cultural connection between the blacks of Africa and those of America. And so in 1949, he wrote the book, Africanisms in the Gullah Dialect. And in 1988, General Joseph Momo of Sierra Leone came to the Penn Center, 70 miles south of here in St. Helens Island. And he got up in front of the people and said in his native tongue, I'm glad to see you today. And a lady in the audience who spoke Gullah replied, Grand goddamn man for talk like we. He sounds like us. So the man who was took the people that talk like we back to Sierra Leone, and the people on both sides were amazed at the similarity of languages, lifestyles, and culture, that PBS went along with them and filmed a documentary that was fittingly entitled Family Across the Sea. And that's the story of Gullah. Yeah. So, wait. Now, I got a couple more. And the next one deals with this. Summertime from Porgy and Bess. Right. What a lot of people don't know that Porgy and Bess has its origins right here in Charleston with a real-life black couple named Maggie Barnes and Samuel Smalls. Samuel Smalls was born right here on James Island somewhere around 1889 with what his father called little images of feet. In other words, he had polio. So there was nothing he could do in James Island to make a living. So the father built him a goat cart, and Nan the goat would pull him around while he would beg for food and money and sometimes sell vegetables. Well, what he would do with the money was he would sometimes use it to drink liquor and shoot dice with the fellas and talk with some of the ladies. And one such lady was Maggie Barnes, who lived uptown on number 4 Romney Street. And on the night of March the 22nd, 1924, he went to Maggie Barnes' place, and they got in an altercation because he accused her of trying to steal his watch. So he pulled out his pistol and started shooting at her. Pow! 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 But However, though, since he had polio, all she had to do was die. So the police were called, and he wound up at the Old City Jail over off Franklin Street. And the headline in the Charleston News and Courier on March the 24th, 1924, went, "Cripple arrested for firing at woman." You know, back when they had all that sensitivity to political correctness, right? So therefore, that next morning, a well-to-do white writer named Du Bois Hayward, who lived over on Church Street, was upstairs reading the paper and eating breakfast with his sister, and he came across that story and said, "Hey, I know this guy." And he thought about Samuel Smalls being born poor, black, disabled, illiterate, and begging in the streets to survive in his pathetic attempts to find love. And he wrote the novel Porgy. Came out in 1925. Pretty good novel, by the way. Makes excellent bedside reading. So, in 1933, in New York, the great jazzman George Gershwin read the book and said, "This is really good stuff." So he came down here to collaborate with Du Bois Hayward over on Folly Island. And thus, on October the 10th, 1935, came the great play Porgy and Bess on Broadway. George Gershwin died in 1937. Du Bois Hayward died in 1940. Samuel Smalls stayed at the Old City Jail on Magazine Street until June 3rd, 1924, when he went before Judge S.C. Brown, and the judge felt sorry for him and suspended his sentence. So he went back home to his mother, where he died 3 months later at roughly between the ages of 35 and 40. In 1970, Maggie Barnes was the last surviving member of this group, and the Charleston News and Courier tried to interview her about being the real Bess, but she refused, because by then she was married to a decent man and involved with her church and didn't want either side to know of that part's past, so she took all that with her to her grave. And in 2007, I spoke with J.C. Gillespie, the grandnephew of Samuel Smalls, for my book True Stories of Black South Carolina, which contains that story. And when I asked him about this, his words to me were as follows: "If a man riding around a goat cart can inspire something that has brought this much joy to the world, then what about us?" That's the real story, Porgy and Bess. So, you see in the back I have this book with Robert Smalls on the cover, called Voices of Black South Carolina. Here's a little bit of background into that. Many people know that Robert Smalls was born in slavery in Beaufort, South Carolina in 1835, and they came here to Charleston around about 1850 or so to work on the docks. And he made history during the Civil War, May 13, 1862, when since he was hired as a boat pilot, he sneaked his family aboard a Confederate ship called the Planter and sailed them off into Union waters, right? That's what people know. Here's what people don't know. From 1865 to 1877, you had what was called the Reconstruction era. After the fall of the Confederacy, the federal government tried to reform the South by passing 3 constitutional amendments. The 13th in 1865 ended slavery throughout the country. The 14th in 1868 said all people born here were citizens. And the 15th in 1870 said that all men had the right to vote. Women would get that in 1920. And this led to things that have largely been written out of the history books. Things like in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1872, there was the first African-American governor. His name was Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback, and he was the founder of Southern University in Baton Rouge. Here in South Carolina, from 1870 to 1877, there were 2 black lieutenant governors. Alonzo Jacob Ramsey served from 1870 to 1872. Richard Howard Lee served from 1872 to 1877. Richard Howard Lee served under Governor Franklin Jacob Moses. First time in American history, or perhaps anywhere, a black lieutenant governor under a Jewish governor running a state. This comes from Philip Dre's excellent book on the subject called Capital May. But here in Charleston, from January to April of 1868, a revolution took place on Meeting Street. The Julius Waites Waring Judicial Center is now known as was then known as the Charleston Clubhouse. And in that building, during those months, 76 blacks and 48 whites gathered to rewrite the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of South Carolina, into the most progressive document America had seen up to that time. It called for such things as all discrimination laws stricken from the books. Women would be allowed to divorce abusive husbands. There would be state hospitals and mental institutions. No one would go to jail for death. And on January 23rd, 1868, the great Robert Smalls got up in that building and declared, resolved, all children between the ages of 7 and 14 must attend public school at least 6 months a year under penalty of non-compliance. That, ladies and gentlemen, was the first public school law ever passed this far south for the Mason-Dixon line. Now, whenever I talk about things like this, people ask me two questions. Number one, why haven't I heard any of this before? And number two, well, what the heck happened? I'll explain them both. Throughout the history of the Deep South, the wealthy class of whites' deepest fear was that the poor whites, in their poverty, illiteracy, and degradation, would find common cause with their black brethren and come together and cause a revolution that would overthrow them. They couldn't have that. So they indoctrinated the poor whites with the idea that if black people were their equals, the poor whites would be in the bottom of society. In simple terms, ladies and gentlemen, divide and conquer of the poor so that the rich could stay rich. That's what racism is all about, Charlie Brown. So, December 24th, 1865, 6 Confederate veterans gathered at the courthouse in Pulaski, Tennessee, to form the Resistance Army Against Reconstruction. They named themselves after the Greek word for circle, which is too close, and the Scottish word for family, which is clan. See where that went? Next 12 years, South bathed in blood. Memphis Massacre of 1866, New Orleans Massacre of 1866, Meridian, Mississippi Massacre of 1871, Colfax, Louisiana Massacre of 1874, Clinton, Mississippi Massacre of 1875, Hamburg, South Carolina Massacre of 1876, Ellington, South Carolina Massacre of 1876, and November the 8th, 1876, right over on Meeting Street in downtown Charleston, blacks and whites shot it out in the middle of the street. Federal government said, yo, this is too much, we can't handle this. So they passed the Tilden Hayes Compromise in 1877, ending Reconstruction. And one byproduct of this was Mildred Rutherford of the Daughters of Confederacy went on a national campaign to erase things like this out of the history books and replace it with Confederate history to, quote, bring this country back together again and put those bad times behind us. Sounds familiar. So here in South Carolina in 1895, Benjamin Ryan Tillman, the senator, followed the lead of Mississippi and had the South Carolina legislature meet to throw out that progressive constitution and bring in the segregation constitution. As described in the Voices of Black South Carolina book, 6 brave black leaders: Robert Smalls, who we just discussed, William J. Whipper, a black lawyer on Broad Street, James Wigg and Isaiah Reed, 2 black lawyers from Beaufort, Thomas Miller, founding president of South Carolina State, and Robert Anderson, a black teacher from Georgetown, South Carolina. Those men went to the State House and risked their lives by arguing eloquently and vociferously against this new mess of a constitution. They lost 116 to 7, but that loss founded the foundation that would lead to the civil rights movement in South Carolina that was to come to undo it. In the short run, they lost the battle, but in the long run, they won the war. And that's important because, as the great historian Jorge Santayana said at Harvard University in 1896, those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. That's why this is important. So, finally, I want to wrap up by talking about a great event in Charleston history that's largely unknown to a lot of people, but plays a great role in what's happening today. The Denmark-Vesey Rebellion of 1822. Denmark-Vesey was born in St. Thomas Virgin Islands around 1767, and he was owned by a Charlestonian named Captain Joseph Vesey. Captain Vesey needed somebody to do the paperwork for the plantation, so he taught Denmark how to read, and boy, did he live to regret that, because Denmark read other things. He read Exodus 21:16, which said, "He that stealeth a man and selleth him shall be put to death." And Revelation 13:10, it said, "He that leadeth into captivity shall be led into captivity." Stuff you don't usually hear in church. Gee, I wonder why. And he also read about the Haitian Revolution, where the black people of Haiti, under Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines, overthrew the rule of Napoleon to make Haiti the first free black republic of the Western Hemisphere. Things you don't usually hear about in the classroom. Gee, I wonder why. So with all that, you could guess what was on Denmark's mind. They came here in 1782. Captain Beasley would rent Denmark out to do chores for other slaveholders. But he would split the commission with Denmark. So Denmark's walking down East Bay Street, September 30th, 1799, when he saw a barker with a roulette wheel and a crowd surrounding him. And the barker said, hurry, 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 ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, step right up, place your bets on the number, step right up. Round and round she goes. Where she stops, nobody knows. Denmark placed the bet on number 1884 and won $1,500. So he went back to Captain Beasley. Let's see now. I'm sitting here working in my ledger here, and Denmark, come on in, old boy. What can I do for you? Captain Beasley, I have something to ask you. Why, certainly. What is it? Sir, how much am I worth? How much are you worth? Well, let me look at my ledger. Let's see. How much is Denmark? Oh, there it is. According to this, you're worth $600. Why do you ask? Biggity, 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 biggity. Okay, I'm worth 600. Here's 8. See you. Hey, wait a minute, Denmark. Have a nice day. So Captain Beasley took Denmark to court, and the court ruled December 31st, 1799, that Denmark Beasley was then, thenceforward, and forever free. Captain Beasley, so Denmark became a lay minister. In the AME Church, we call them class leaders at Hempstead AME Church on Charleston's east side. And while he was doing that, he was secretly gathering his forces to form the Great Slave Rebellion of 1822. The plan was they were going to break into the city armory late at night and steal guns. And they were going to go throughout Charleston setting fires. And when the slave master came to put them out, pow, 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 pow. Then they would go throughout Charleston, freeing black people, and he would lead them down to Charleston Harbor, where they would take the guns and hijack ships and sail to Haiti where they would be free. But he warned his followers, do not tell the house slaves. And why did he say that?
They're going to tell the master.
Yes! May 25th, 1822, one of Denmark's followers, William Fall, went to the corner of Broad and East Bay and ran into a house slave. His name was Peter Prelude, owned by Captain John Prelude. He said, hey, Peter, what's going on? Oh, I'm all right. How you doing, Mr. Paul? Oh, I'm okay. Hey, Peter, look here. You want to get down with what the Denmark Beasley is trying to do? Denmark Beasley? Who that? Shh, not so loud. Here's our plan. We're going to sneak over into the army. Wait a minute now. You're going to do all of that, Peter? Wait a minute. Peter, don't fail me now. Hey, Peter, wait. You can tell where this is going, but I'm going to tell it. He ran back to his owner, Captain John Prelude. Mr. Prelude! Mr. Prelude! Mr. Prelude! Oh, my goodness, Peter. What do you mean by waking me up at this ungodly hour? Do you realize what time it is? What's the matter? You're shaking like a leaf on a tree. Mr. Prelude, guess what Mr. Denmark Beasley's going to do? Guess what he's going to do? He is? Oh, my goodness. Heavens to Murgatroyd. This is outrageous. Atrocious. And it's pretty bad, too. I must call out the militia expeditiously and right now. So he called out the militia. And Beasley and 30 of his followers were captured on June 16, 1822, and the court ruled on July 2nd, 1822, Denmark Beasley and his followers would hang by the neck until dead. Peter was fat and happy. The state of South Carolina freed Peter, gave him a financial stipend for the rest of his life, never had to work again. But elsewhere in Charleston was a free and educated black man named Bishop Daniel Alexander Payne. He had a school for free and enslaved children on Tradd Street. And because Denmark Beasley used the Bible, history books, and the Constitution to encourage revolution, the state of South Carolina made it illegal to teach an African American to read and write. So they shut down his school. But he didn't let that stop him. He went to Xenia, Ohio, and started Wilberforce College, the first black college in America that was run by black people. And one of his graduates was Bishop Richard Harvey King, who came down here in 1865 and took what was left of the Hempstead AME Church and built a new church on 110 Calhoun Street, which he would name after the Hebrew word for God is with us, and said it would be the mother of the new black churches in Charleston. And that is how, what folks? Mother Emanuel, AME, came into being. And by the way, they used an architect to help build that church by the name of Robert Beasy, Denmark's son. So, most everybody knows that on June the 17th, 2015, the terrorist Dylan Roof entered Mother Emanuel and assassinated a couple of good friends of mine, the Reverend Clemente Pinckney and the librarian Cynthia Hurd, as well as 7 other members of the congregation. Dylan Roof was tried at the Julius Wade Ware Judicial Center, and today he is at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, awaiting his execution. A lot of people know that President Obama came down here right after all this, and basically gave the eulogy for Reverend Pinckney. And he made history when, during the eulogy, he went off script and gave his rendition of My name is Damon Fordham, and I hope you enjoy this presentation. Well, I'm going to go and sign books in a couple of seconds, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. It was that straightforward, huh? All right, so I'm going to be in the back. Yes, ma'am.
So your storytelling came from you hearing those stories from your aunt?
Well, not just her. My dad was also a really great storyteller, and if I had more time, I would get deep into that also. But primarily, though, my dad and a lot of the elders around me were of that generation that grew up before television, where the elders would tell stories, and in some cases it was passed down. The problem with that was that oftentimes in a lot of black homes in those days, when the elders would tell stories and the kids were around, they'd say, "Man, go on about your business. This grown folks talk," right? Well, my parents, on the other hand, they saw that I loved to listen to things like that, and so I soaked it all up, and it turned out that, because, see, I was very unathletic and was very bad at sports, and I loved to read a lot, and so between that and the reading, that's what got me into this.
Oh, that's great.
Yes? Mr. Potts and me.
How can we get that from?
Right now, it just ran out of print, unfortunately. But you might be able to find some on eBay or Amazon. Okay, any other questions?
So can you tell us a little bit about the Robert Small person that you portrayed?
Oh,
From Buford?
okay, basically after the conference where he tried to defend the African, basically after he tried to defend the black people of South Carolina from the segregation constitution, basically after that he more or less retired, because he had a position as a collector of clerk at Buford, and when Benjamin Tillman was in power, he took him out of that, and he died of diabetes in 1915 at the age of, I think he was in his 70s at the time he died of diabetes. But it's only been in recent years that he's been gaining recognition. And one of the themes in my work is that Robert Smalls, Denmark VZ, and Septima Clark and people like that, there are way more of them, because the average person mostly knows what they are told. And it's up to those of us who do a lot of reading and studying to take this stuff out to the general public in a language that they can understand, you see. Because right now, you have a combination of things like there are people on YouTube who are misleading the youth with false histories and getting them all mixed up, because this generation came along too late to sit at the feet of the type of elders who knew these things. That generation died out. So it's important that just like I was telling you about Rahman al-Sadi in Africa back 400 years ago. Basically, I see what I do as one of the inheritors of that tradition. When I went to Africa and met some of the griots, well, that just further encouraged me to do what I'm doing now.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
With people who are inspired and think about wanting to tell stories and do things like this, what would you recommend they do to get started?
Well, nowadays you have the good fortune of gaining a following through social media, YouTube, and things like that. Put your stuff out there, okay? Because, you know, it's like the great Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said, a long journey begins with one step. And it used to be a lot difficult because back in the days I got started through radio and newspapers. But that was kind of rough because back then, because with newspapers and radio, you have a lot of gatekeepers. And if you're not part of that in group, you don't get in. But now, social media and YouTube has made a more democratic process of that. So just tell your stories, film yourself, put it out there, and gain a following, and it goes up from there. Okay, Mayor, then you.
Okay, well, it's actually sort of a comment. So Jonathan Green did a children's book about Robert Smalls, and we had a display of the artwork from that book here in the Art Center, I guess a year or two ago.
Good.
First major
It was
displays.
our first exhibit.
Good, very good, very good. Now, what was your question?
Well, it was more of like a comment. Like, since I moved here like 7 years ago, and I've been like trying to find events and things. Like, will we have to wait a whole year to move a festival to like have something like this happen? Is actually trying to start like local events and maybe invite people to come, whether it's at different locations, like if they were to host here or Redux or any location, and we start to like start small.
Be sure to begin to follow the Facebook page of the Damon Art Center. We do have programs here.
Oh, okay.
And hopefully-
Sorry, so
And people
that's
like
an
myself
example
too.
of
I'm on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. So we're out here putting in the work. Trust me. See, but the thing is
we don't-
getting
people
this.
don't know.
But that's where I'm about to go with this. You see, things like this are a start to let you know that we are here and that we are out there doing it. And this is just one small way of doing it. Because there are people who've been following me on social media, my YouTube channel, The American Storyteller, and my books and all. I've been out there for years doing this stuff. So we're here. It's just a matter of you knowing, getting the word out there of where to look.
If you don't do social media, they have an email sign-up list too. And we've had a lot of programs.
That's right.
Yeah.
I met you way back when I first moved here from California. I met you, and you and I talked about the first book. So I grew up, and when you were talking Gullah, I knew exactly what you were saying.
Very good. Very
So I
good.
love Gullah, so when I'm in circles, I begin to speak Gullah. They're like, what are you talking about? Hey, that's a part of it.
Well, you know, it's good that we live in a generation that has now seen where that is an asset and not a liability. You see?
Exactly.
Because so many people, and see, one of the things that I came to understand when I went to Africa is that so many people have born and died without ever knowing the capacity of their true greatness. And when I spoke to the students at the University of Gambia in Banjul, West Africa, I said, you know, when I get back to America, I'm going to tell people the truth about Africa so that they're not going to continue to walk in darkness of their true greatness.
I know it would be like a radical idea, but to say, like, this is a language that could be offered in school.
Well,
You know what I mean?
actually, yes, let me say this about that.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be necessary, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah, okay.
Because number one, you see, it's almost like if you were in Brooklyn and you had a class on how to teach children how to say, my baby's father is incarcerated, or a class in London on how to say things like, all right, Mike, on your whites, and so on and so forth. When you grow up in a situation of low income and poverty and so forth, you're more concerned about whether your whether you have a roof over your head and food in your belly, than whether your subjects and verbs agree. So a child in that environment already knows how to do that. The thing is also to teach that child how to navigate both worlds of that and standard English so that they can get ahead. But as for other people speaking Gullah, it's like, what's the point? Because see, a lot of times this is to our advantage, because that means that outside societies don't know what we're saying, and we want to keep it that way.
I appreciate that, and that's excellent. I think what the part that I really wanted to drive home to was like having outreach to educators so that they understand. I know you're saying it's happening, but just working in New York City DOE for 20 years, the whole code switch and language change, to have like educators understand and appreciate and have like humility about the long history of this
That's
language.
already being done. Dr.
Okay.
Jessica Berry down here is doing, a good friend of mine, who is doing an excellent job of that down here, and there are many other educators like that.
And they also have the Gullah Nation here. They have a location here in Tulsa.
And then if you start looking at that language and start saying, you know what, we're bilingual, and start looking at it as a positive.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly.
Absolutely.
So all that's been done, yes.
Going back to YouTube, talking about how some people have false information on it.
Yeah, big time.
Well, I did see that one thing because I was watching Crash Course with Clint Smith on there.
Who?
Clint Smith. He wrote this book that was on video.
Oh, when the word is passed. Yeah,
Yes, yes.
he's good, because he and I were in some of the same, I didn't meet him, but we went to a lot of the same places in West Africa. Yeah, he's good.
And I was wondering if you have any other recommendations on YouTube other than your own channel.
My good friend and mentor, Dr. Henry Louis Gates. He also has a 2-minute, this thing about 2-minute Black history. There are some people who I think that are out there that are full of garbage, but I will not waste time by mentioning them here. But if you want some really good information, I think that Dr. Gates is very good. There's Professor James Smalls, who I think does some pretty decent stuff also. But and usually most of the things that are involved with PBS are pretty good. As you are doing the right thing.
Yes, sir.
PBS does an excellent job of that sort of thing.
And then you got to be careful because AI is doing
Oh yeah, because there are a lot of these cheap videos that they've got in the barbershops right now that I won't mention that just mislead a whole lot of people with bad information. That's also filled with sexism, and there are these people who try to buy Black Americans from their African and Caribbean and other diaspora folks. That stuff is garbage. You see, a lot of people, because again, you have a lot of the last couple of generations that didn't grow up in the stable communities that once existed, so they don't grow up with that code of conduct or an understanding of history. And I'll just sum all that up by saying this. In times of crisis, false prophets do well.
Good job.
And I just want to leave you with one last thought, folks, and that's this. One thing I hope that you all get from this is the more you learn, there is to learn. Thank you.
Good job.